Welcome to Think, React, Lead, bringing you insights and strategies for thinking as an executive, reacting like a soldier, and leading in all aspects of your life. Here's your host, executive coach and leadership speaker, Dom Faussette.
Welcome to the Think, React, Lead podcast, where you will be provided insights on thinking as an executive, reacting like a soldier, and leading in various aspects of your career and personal life. I am your host, Dom Faussette. Special treat for you today. What we're going to do is listen to this podcast I was on. It's for the Speaking for Profit podcast with Cindy Ashton and Jason Reed. Cindy Ashton is my speaker's agent. And during this podcast, we're going to talk about vulnerability, authenticity, and courage. And once again, this is the Speaking for Profit podcast that you're going to listen to. Get prepared to listen to myself, Cindy, and Jason Reed. Just kind of dive in on, like I said, vulnerability, authenticity, and courage as it relates to speaking and becoming the best version of self. Stay tuned and get ready to listen.
The Speaking for Profit podcast. This is the show for speakers, performers, and business professionals who speak. We'll discuss the craft of performing, storytelling, and how to connect to your audience so that you can increase your influence and your profits. We'll also go behind the mic with entertaining stories from the stage and the road. Joining me from San Diego, California is CEO of the Speaker Stardom Booking Agency and host of the TV series Cindy Uncorked, Cindy Ashton.
And joining me from Toronto is award-winning journalist, speak-to-sell expert, master storyteller, and really amazing human being, Mr. Jason Reed.
Well, thank you, Cindy, and welcome to the Speaking for Profit podcast. Now, today, we are going to be discussing some wonderful topics such as vulnerability, authenticity, and courage with our special guest today, Dom Faussette.
Dom, you gotta love Dom. He has such amazing energy, and he's actually one of our elite level speakers, but this guy is off the charts with his energy and his passion. So we're really in for a treat today.
We absolutely are. And in addition to our interview with Dom, we're going to be discussing about how many talk descriptions that you should put into your marketing materials. Now, I know we have a lot of people out there who speak on a lot of different subjects, but the big challenge is often, what is it that we select and where do we stop? Because the last thing we want to do is overwhelm the very people who are trying to book us, right?
Absolutely. But first, here's our behind the mic interview with leadership speaker, Dom Faussette. I am super jazzed because Dom Faussette is in the house, and he is an award-winning speaker and founder of Leaders LLC. Now, here's what's really cool. As a child, he was challenged with a severe stutter, and it really motivated him to learn effective communication and rapport. And, as a result, this guy went all the way to assistant vice president of a Fortune 500 company without a degree, by the way. He's a veteran of military and law enforcement. He has spent 16 years in corporate leadership. Now, Dom is completely known about, obviously effective communication and building strong teams and rapport. And it's going to be great to hear from him today. But one of the things I love about him is that he's really a strong believer in vulnerable leadership. So for sure, we're going to dive into that. And of course, he's one of our elite level speakers at Speaker Stardom Agency, and he's just a remarkable human being. So Dom, welcome to the house.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's dive right in, because you did start with a stutter and then you went on to have massive success in several different areas. Tell us, what are some of the experiences that you drew upon when you first started to speak?
When I first started to speak, I just drew on comfortability. It wasn't until I was around 20 years of age that I noticed that my stutter had lessened, and that stemmed from being deployed. So I was K-9 in the Air Force, and when you're K-9, I had a military working dog. So I was just the guy with the dog. That's your partner. So when you go out into the field, it's just you and the dog. And as crazy as this might sound, I would have long conversations with Clint, my K-9.
Aww.
And Clint was a great listener. I'll just say that. In hindsight, what I learned was a lot of stutterers, young or old, the reason why they stutter is because of being judged. And there's a certain anxiety that kicks in. Well, dogs don't judge you. And even if they do, you don't know this. So years of doing that allowed me to develop a communication style that worked for me. And I began to become comfortable in my skin. And then once I jumped into law enforcement, there's just no room for stuttering because your life depends on that. There's just a certain level of confidence one has to have. So there was this mask I put on, if you will, that allowed me to orate in a way that was not, I would say, my original self, but I blossomed into this person, and it allowed me to be comfortable in myself. And I kind of found my lane. And as I started speaking, I just started being vulnerable because I don't remember much as it relates as I get on stage. So my ability to connect with the audience stems from sharing of stories and being present in the now and just being comfortable in my own lane.
You know, it's interesting because I also stuttered quite badly when I was younger. And I think about like every third or fourth professional speaker I know who I've talked to has also had that problem. It's interesting how we've all gravitated to professional speaking. How did you actually get into speaking to groups?
So without a degree in the corporate field, it's hard to move up. But everybody knows one of the largest fears amongst humans is, as they call, public speaking. I think everything is public speaking because most of us don't speak in private. There's no such thing as private speaking. And being able to jump in front of an audience, whether it's an audience of executives, peers, direct reports, was my thing. I hate Excel spreadsheets. I don't like putting white papers together. I don't like the research aspect. But when I worked with a team of peers, nobody wanted to speak. So I was like, okay, this is a perfect opportunity. All you want me to do is take all the work you put together for 3 months and I deliver it for 30 minutes. Done. So once I started doing that, I realized that if you can speak, you can lead because now you have an audience. And when people see somebody speaking, they automatically think they're the leader of the group, large or small. So as I was doing that, I noticed I was getting promoted, which speaking, you learn how to interview well. So everything that I did surrounded speaking. And that just helped me promote because nobody wanted to speak. And that for me was the best tool in my bag.
You know, it's so interesting because what you essentially did is leverage your strengths, which is what's really smart. You know, I actually did that in university. So when I was growing up, first of all, I don't like writing, even though I write speeches with clients all day for a living. But I don't like writing. I just love pulling the content from my clients. But it was interesting because growing up, I was in and out of a hospital and I missed a lot of school. And so I missed out on actually learning how to read and write. I mean, I could read, but I wasn't a strong writer. And when I got to university, whenever I had an essay, I would literally use my persuasion tactics, at least for the music side of my degree. For the kinesiology side of my degree, I wasn't able to do this. But for the music side of the degree, I would go up to the professor and say, French Impressionism. Why would you want me to write on French Impressionism when instead I could prepare, art songs from the French Impressionistic era and do a full presentation and really help you to experience the era instead of me writing about it. And I ended up getting myself out of almost every music essay I ever had to write because I would present and I would sing. And I love what you're saying, Dom, because that's really about we need to leverage our strengths. And for you found speaking out of two things: the need to be able to leverage your strengths, and as well as the need to, with your canine, with Clint, around being able to find a way to communicate that was safe. First and foremost, you found a way to communicate that was safe, and then you expanded that out.
Yes.
And I'd like to talk a little bit more about this, speaking within an organization, because I had a somewhat similar experience when I was in television, when I was a producer and I was a news director, because senior management knew I could speak. Whenever there was an opportunity for somebody to speak about programming at an internal or external event, often they would pick me, and it would be like myself and all of these other vice presidents or presidents. And it's interesting because you mentioned that whole idea of when you're speaking, people see you as the leader. And looking back on it, I sometimes wonder if my own bosses were somewhat undercut by the fact that I was actually the face. I was the person that people naturally came to because I was the one who was always speaking. But I think that's really important for anybody working up in an organization to recognize that being able to speak will give you huge opportunities. I had the chance to speak to the Canadian Marketing Association National Conference. It was like hundreds of people. I was given the opportunity to do that the day before because for whatever reason, the vice president of marketing chickened out. So suddenly here I am in front of like 800 people and I didn't have any pressure on me. So I just enjoyed it. But looking back, it's like, wow, like those were really great opportunities every time I got up to speak to an audience to just build my own personal brand.
It works. It's people look at speaking. If you can speak, they look at you as a superhero.
Absolutely.
It's superpower. And to us, it's like, yeah, not a problem. I'll go speak for 45 minutes in front of 1,000 people. No big deal.
Yeah. I for me, the bigger the crowd, the easier.
Oh, seriously. You give me 2 people, I'm sweating. You give me 2,000, it is on.
I know. I mean, I'm not really sweating at this point because I'm an old fart in this business. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the bigger the crowd, the easier. It really does. Because I also find, I don't know about you guys, but I find when it's a really big crowd, the lights are on me. Mm-hmm. So I'm not having to see individual faces.
You can't see their eyes. Yeah. Facial expression.
So I'm able to actually connect in with the energy. It actually, because the lights are so bright, I'm actually able to have to deepen my connection with their energy instead, which is really cool. So let me ask you this. What do you think are the key principles to being a good speaker?
A person has to understand what their brightest parts of life are, as well as what their darkest parts of life are. What I've learned is that when you are comfortable with both ends of your experience spectrum, as I would call it, and that's just your experience in life, you're able to share stories from your past with your audience and make them resonate with your audience and make them see you as a person, not this esoteric speaker, but just a dude that's on stage that's just like them. And when I can share maybe a law enforcement experience or a military experience or even a canine experience, because everybody loves dogs, and correlate that to the topic that I'm speaking on, it resonates with my audience. And there's I tell people all the time, don't make the first time that you speak out loud on your dark past on stage. It needs to be done 20, 30 times in private, right, or in your mirror or on a video camera. And the reason for that is we think we have our past in the bag. I can get on stage and speak, but what happens is you get on stage and you share your story, and then you start seeing that your story and your words are impacting people and raising goosebumps or raising the hair on their back or causing maybe some to tear up a little bit. And then you just turn into a babbling idiot because you start connecting with your audience in a way that you never thought could happen. And then you stay on that portion of your story way too long, and then you disconnect. But I think if a person can be so authentic in their approach and so vulnerable in their own skin, that no matter who they're speaking to, because it's their story. Nobody can retell. Like, I can't tell Jason Reed's story. I can't tell Cindy's story. I can always tell Dom's story. And we entertain in a way, because if we look at any television series, there's this level of sadness that turns into happiness. And I just think people miss the authenticity portion of self prior to getting on stage. And I learned that from an executive. He said, Dom, you sound so perfect when you're speaking that you disconnect with the audience. And I was floored. And then I just say, you know what? I'm just going to be Dom.
Absolutely. When speakers come to me and they're fully scripted word for word, I'm like, good God, they're not my speaker. Right. Because how could you possibly be yourself when you're trying to memorize a script? And it's like, you got to just obviously know your talking points, but let it go and be yourself and trust that. And I think part of the problem is that we don't trust ourselves and we don't trust that we're good enough. I mean, I know for me, certainly, and it doesn't seem this way because I'm so completely myself and outrageous most of the time. But, what people don't realize is that I've spent most of my life feeling like it wasn't okay for me to be me. Right. And, and the big change for me, I mean, Canada's a great country, but I had a lot of criticism. I'm very American. I mean, although my Canadian values are within me. I'm very American in my style. And so I had a lot of rejection, and it wasn't okay for me to be myself in Canada. I had to sing a little quieter, not be so loud, not be so boisterous on stage. And I'm like, but that's who I am. I'm big and loud and boisterous, like, and I'm quirky and weird and wonderful all at the same time. And, the first time I really felt like I was loved and accepted was when I moved to the US. And that's not to put down Canada. It's a very different culture. And, to kind of go with what you're saying is, I think you're right. We all have to be willing to be ourselves. But to add on to that, I think you also have to figure out where your crowd is.
Right.
So, clearly my crowd is here. Although now that I've had success in America, suddenly I'm fine in Canada being loud.
Right. Now they love it.
Of course, that's just typical of Canadians. We don't recognize anyone until they're recognized in the United States first.
Right? So funny.
So what do you actually think, Dom, is the number one thing that you need to do to really connect with your audience, other than what we've talked about so far?
When I first started, I didn't have your audience, even though everybody I talked to said, you got to find your niche, you got to find your audience, you got to find your audience. And what I found, and so this is hindsight, what I have found is that our limiting beliefs will tell us that our audience is a smaller, more comfortable audience, something that we're comfortable with. But if you remove just those restraints and just understand who you are, I learned that by doing videos on social media, it let me see who I resonated with. I thought my audience originally was high school students. What I have found out, hindsight, is that my audience are C-suite executives, people that have hidden who they are for so long to create success, and now they're not happy with where they're at in life, and they just want to try something new. They want to be happy. And I think as a speaker, my audience came from just being myself and getting on social media late in the game. I've been on social media for 2 years and just sharing my story, sharing some insight to my world, and being okay with speaking for free. Because what I have found as I'm talking to other speakers is that they speak once or twice in a year and they automatically call themselves speakers, and then they don't want to do the free stuff. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to do the talking to kindergartners and then talking to whatever opportunities come their way, and self gets in the way. So our audience changes, because if we're a true speaker or a leader, which is a person of influence, we're growing. If maybe not weekly, maybe not monthly, but at least quarterly. And the person the person I was in 2018 is definitely not the person that I am today. So as you evolve, not you guys, but as a speaker evolves, their audience evolves. So the time for me to find my niche is down the road. Right now, I'm just trying to find my comfortability on stage with a mic, and my niche will come as they may.
Right.
So what you're saying is it's all about finding your voice first.
Totally is. Because I was a jerk speaker when I first started. I was prior military, ex-cop. I'd get on stage and I would just bark. And there's not a lot of people that are comfortable with that. And then as I saw, I had a speaker coach, and he said, Dom, I want you to try something else. Say what you just said and lower your tone. And now talk to us. So I did it. And he said, see how better you resonate with your audience. He said, there's a time and a place. But that thing that you're doing for 30 minutes straight, it's not. You need to connect with your audience and understand what they need and what they want before you provide what you think you have to do.
Right.
All right.
Well, and I think that the art of being quiet is very underrated as speakers. Mm-hmm. And it's really, I see a lot of people who bark at an audience, and it's like, they think that's enthusiasm, and they don't realize that when you lower it down, there creates an intimacy and you bring people in. And it's important to recognize that when you bark at an audience, it's a little much, and it exhausts them over time. Mm-hmm. And they stop listening. Like if you have a dog barking at you, you just want to go in the other room, right?
Right.
It's the same thing. Don't bark.
And then there's that,
as much as I love dogs.
Then there's that whole rhythm too. I mean, it's been said that music is actually the space between the notes. And I also think that's the same when speaking too.
Right.
Oh, definitely is. I would totally agree with that statement. I feel that speaking is 80% entertainment, 20% education. And me being able to talk about my flaws and how I got to where I am in any corporate environment or any stage that I'm on, having people laugh at me because I can do it in like a comedic way for a couple minutes here and there. It just lets people just like, wow, like I can do it too. Because believe it or not, there's so many people out there that want to be speakers. You guys hear all the time, oh, you're a speaker? I've always wanted to be a speaker. I mean, you always hear that. I'm like, nah, dude, if you really always wanted to do it, you would have done it. You're just afraid to do it because you're not sure how to move forward with it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Talking about somebody wanting to start out as a speaker and getting them moving on it, what would be that piece of advice you would give to them?
I would say get on any stage that you can, but it starts, you can start with social media. Like that's a huge platform that
absolutely
speakers didn't have in the past. And social media allows you to share a message and be okay with being judged. Like that's the biggest reason people don't jump on Instagram or Facebook Lives or do videos, because they don't want to be judged. So if you're afraid of being judged, find a Facebook group that you're very, very welcomed in, that you almost feel loved in, and do some 30-second videos in that Facebook group. And then once you're comfortable there, do videos on your own page. You have to find little audiences here and there.
You know, it's interesting because I often find audiences on airplanes.
They can't get away.
Oh, I still remember once I was like on a plane and I started talking and this other person's like listening. And then suddenly I had like 4 or 5 chairs all around me. I mean, they couldn't move their chairs. Obviously, we're on a plane, but people were turning around and leaning in and they're like, do you have a book? And I'm like, I do. And I actually had copies on me and I sold out all my copies on the plane and I made a few $100s while I was flying. And it was just because I started talking and then the next person heard and then the next person heard. I mean, you can talk to people in a laundromat. You have 2 other people sitting there waiting for their stuff to finish tumbling. You know, start a conversation. What's your message? What's your story that you want to test out on them? And just do it.
Right.
You know, tell your friends. You know what I always tell my speakers who are starting out, and I don't tend to work with starting out speakers unless they really, really compel me for a reason. But I always tell starting out speakers, you know what you should do is do living room workshops. Because then you're inviting your friends over and say, hey, I really want to test out some material. Can you come by for a couple of hours? Let's do a potluck. All us girls can hang out or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And test it out and just say, what did you think? What did you like the best out of this workshop? What did you like the best? Which story did you like the best? What didn't you like? And then you're actually working out your content while having fun with your friends. And it's a really safe space.
Totally is. There's an app called Thumbtack that when I got turned down a couple times by agents, because somebody told me that you don't reach out to us, we'll reach out to you. I said, all right, fair enough. He told me about Thumbtack. And that's for me, that was a very simple way for me to post a couple videos. And when somebody or a school puts on there, hey, we're looking for a leadership or motivational speaker, I could submit my information. You know, it didn't pay a lot, $500 here, $1,000 there, but it's still, as a speaker, whether it's $5 or $500, we can say we're getting paid as a speaker.
Right.
And it teaches you what you're capable of doing and what resonates with people that are looking for a speaker. And I think it's a very simple way to start out.
So what is Thumbtack? Because this is new to me. Thumbtack, it's called?
It's literally just an app so Thumbtack, and there's Thumbtack Pro. Thumbtack is a place you go to look for, say, a plumber or a speaker or anything to get something done that you can't do yourself. Thumbtack Pro is where that plumber posts their information or the speaker posts their information. So I created an account, posted a sizzle reel, a couple other videos that I've done from speaking, and then slowly but surely I would get picked up. And when your offer is submitted, they only allow a total of 5 offers. So you don't have a lot of competition, if you will. And then once 5 are completed, they shut it down, and then the person will typically contact you, and you kind of build a relationship from there.
Cool. Yeah, so it sounds like
we learn something new every time.
We certainly do. So, Dom, where can people find you if they want to find out more about you?
I can be found on a couple different places. So my website is thinkreactlead.com. Instagram is Dom Faussette, Facebook Dom Faussette, or Think React Lead on both of those platforms. There's Twitter. I just started using Snapchat. A little weird for me, but I'm opening myself up to it.
You're brave.
Right. an old man on Snapchat. But and then
at least you got a law enforcement background.
Okay, dude, you're
right.
better than me.
It feels weird, but it's something I have to do. And then YouTube, which is Think React Lead. YouTube at thinkreactlead.com.
Awesome. And if people want to book you as a speaker, go to speakerstardom.com. Dom, thank you so much for coming and playing with us today.
Thanks so much.
You guys have a good day. Bye-bye.
And that was Dom Faussette. And you know, the interesting thing with Dom is it's just the guy has so much courage. Because, you know, you would never know listening to him right now that here is a man who had a stuttering problem and a confidence problem early on in his life.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, for those of you, when you look in the show notes, if you decide to look on his Instagram or his LinkedIn or anything, I mean, this is a man that you look at him on social media and he is so magnetic, so out there, so confident. And it's really inspiring to think this is a guy who stuttered.
Yeah, who you know spent a lot of time in his early years basically talking to no one else but his dog. So that's
I know. It's actually that should be really inspiring for any of our shy listeners for sure.
Exactly. Always start with your dog.
Right.
So
woof woof.
Woof woof. So we move now to our listener question, which is from Bobby from Hamilton. And he asks us this question. He says, how many different talk descriptions should I have on my website and my one sheet? And Cindy, in the Speak to Sell space, we have a very well-known phrase that says, the confused mind never buys. And I think that definitely relates to meeting planners as well. So what are your tips on limiting your talk topics and descriptions?
I love this question because you're right. A confused mind never buys. And also having too many talks that don't connect into one platform also is another deterrent. So the answer is you want to have your 3 signature presentations on your website, on your speaker sheet, everywhere. You do not want to have more than 3. And your 3 have to relate to an underlying message. So, for example, if it was my platform, which we'll just use mine again as an example, I have a talk on the actual presentation part of speaking. I have a talk on storytelling, which again is still part of presentation. And then I have a talk on influence strategies in the boardroom. And all of those have to do with presenting. They just have a different slant to it. So but I also have a second platform that again has only 3 that's around living with disability, chronic illness and invisible disability. So, you know, but again, I've completely separated those into 2 different speaking sheets. I've separated them out on my website. So it's really clear that they're different platforms. So I see a lot of people who don't have such a huge difference. Like obviously presenting skills and chronic illness are 2 very different platforms. That's obvious. But for example, one of our elite clients, you know, before we took them on, we said, listen, we need you to clean up these talks. You've got 10 different talks and some have to do with this and some have to do that. And they don't even jive with each other. They're all within the business realm, but they all have a very, very different message and a different positioning. So it's really, really important that you separate them out. So he ended up separating out the business skills that were more for teenagers versus the peacemaking stuff that he does. That was a different platform versus the negotiation and leadership stuff he does. Those were 3 very, very different platforms. So it was really important for him to be able to separate those out because otherwise it's like, is this guy doing, you know, violence prevention and peacemaking or is he working with teenagers on whatever? Like it became really confusing. So when we gave him coaching and for us to be able to take him on, we gave him that feedback around 3 talks only in each category and separate them out and market them differently and be really clear of what the underlying message is for each of them.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that I've noticed with my clients is a lot of people, particularly these days when people have had, you know, multiple careers, people don't like being pigeonholed, but in a lot of respects, you kind of need to be pigeonholed. Obviously, you want to be different, but it has to be very clear what sort of specific topics that you talk about. And they always do have to be related around a theme because that's how meeting planners think, right? They're thinking that they need to fill a hole or a slot on the conference that they have, and they may already have a couple of other speakers, so they need to very quickly understand, oh, okay, this person is an expert on X, right?
Absolutely. Brilliant.
The other thing about creating three from a psychological point of view, if you understand sales psychology, choice psychology, is if you have one, it seems like the person doesn't have a choice. And if you have two of something, it also seems like the person doesn't have a choice, because if you don't want the one, you're kind of forced to take the other. But with three, it at least gives, if nothing else, the illusion that that person has choice. And particularly if you're doing speak to sell, where your talk really needs to match your pitch, one of the things you can do is have three different talk titles and descriptions, but they all have to sort of funnel into obviously whatever it is that you are pitching. You don't want to be thinking about pitching a storytelling program and then going in and talking about something totally different, like in negotiation in the workplace or something like that. You want to make sure when you're speaking to sell, especially if you're paying to be on the stage, that your talk really matches what you're going to be pitching.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to the next point, is that you get your talks really dialed in, and then once you get hired, when you give them the talk title and description, you might do some slight alterations depending on the audience.
Exactly. And that almost always happens, when you start getting down to brass tacks with the meeting planner or the person actually running the meeting, and figure out what their specific needs are. So
absolutely. Beautiful.
Yeah. So that's our episode today. And before we wrap up, we want to remind you to share our podcast with your friends.
And those of you that are new to our podcast, be sure to check out our back catalog, because we've got a lot of super amazing episodes.
And you know what? Even if you've been a regular listener, you may want to go back and revisit some of our early programs. I've noticed, as I've done that myself, we've got so much great information. We've got good stories and brilliant advice from our guests. So they're definitely worth listening to again if you're in your car or you're on transit. And Cindy, you'll like this. I've even heard from more than one of our listeners who actually take us to bed with them and enjoy our soothing voices before they turn in. From Cindy Ashton, I'm Jason Reed. Good night.
Good night.
Joining me from San Diego, California, is CEO of the Speaker Stardom Booking Agency and host of the TV series Cindy Uncorked, Cindy Ashton.
And I fucked it up again.
Great. Always coming in early.
whatever. Like it became really confusing. So when we gave him coaching and for us to be able to take him on, we gave him that feedback around 3 talks only in each category and separate them out and market them differently and be really clear of what the underlying message is for each of them.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I've noticed with my clients is a lot of people, particularly these days when people have had, multiple careers, people don't like being pigeonholed, but in a lot of respects, you kind of need to be pigeonholed. Obviously, you want to be different, but it has to be very clear what sort of specific topics that you talk about. And they always do have to be related around a theme, because that's how meeting planners think. Right? They're thinking that they need to fill a hole or a slot on the conference that they have, and they may already have a couple of other speakers, so they need to very quickly understand, oh, okay, this person is an expert on X, right?
Absolutely. Brilliant.
The other thing about creating 3 from a psychological point of view, if you understand sales psychology, choice psychology, is if you have 1, it seems like the person doesn't have a choice. And if you have 2 of something, it also seems like the person doesn't have a choice, because if you don't want the one, you're kind of forced to take the other. But with 3, it at least gives, if nothing else, the illusion that that person has choice. And particularly if you're doing speak to sell, where your talk really needs to match your pitch, one of the things you can do is have 3 different talk titles and descriptions, but they all have to sort of funnel into obviously whatever it is that you are pitching. You don't want to be thinking about pitching a storytelling program and then going in and talking about something totally different, like in negotiation in the workplace or something like that. You want to make sure when you're speaking to sell, especially if you're paying to be on the stage, that your talk really matches what you're going to be pitching.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to the next point, is that you get your talks really dialed in, and then once you get hired, when you give them the talk title and description, you might do some slight alterations depending on the audience.
Exactly. And that almost always happens, when you start getting down to brass tacks with the meeting planner or the person actually running the meeting, and figure out what their specific needs are. So
absolutely. Beautiful.
Yeah. So that's our episode today. And before we wrap up, we want to remind you to share our podcast with your friends.
And those of you that are new to our podcast, be sure to check out our back catalog, because we've got a lot of super amazing episodes.
And you know what? Even if you've been a regular listener, you may want to go back and revisit some of our early programs. I've noticed, as I've done that myself, we've got so much great information. We've got good stories and brilliant advice from our guests. So they're definitely worth listening to again if you're in your car or you're on transit. And Cindy, you'll like this. I've even heard from more than one of our listeners who actually take us to bed with them and enjoy our soothing voices before they turn in. From Cindy Ashton, I'm Jason Reed. Good night.
Good night.
Joining me from San Diego, California, is CEO of the Speaker Stardom Booking Agency and host of the TV series Cindy Uncorked, Cindy Ashton.
And I fucked it up again.
Great. We're always coming in early.
You've been listening to Think, React, Lead. To connect with your authentic purpose, contact Dom at www.thinkreactlead.com.